Trees. They're all around us, even if we live in cities, but we so often take them for granted. And yet they can grow to be the biggest and the longest living beings on the planet. But now they're under threat all over the world. In the northern hemisphere, it's acid rain from aerial-borne pollutants. And in the tropics, right throughout the tropics, it's vast clearing at a rapid rate. Here in Australia, it's dieback, caused by fungal attack and insects and salinity. But it's not just the trees that have got problems. Whatever happens to them affects us. Our relationship with trees goes back a long way. We've co-evolved with them. And there are a number of obvious and simple reasons why they've always been important to us. For many people, parks with trees and forests are a place to escape to, a place for recreation. Trees have always been a source of food, although today most of us will find the fruit and nuts we eat at a supermarket rather than pick them off the trees. Trees have also provided home and shelter for birds and animals, and for people. Sometimes home was a tree. With all of our space-age materials to choose from, timber is still a very important and popular choice for house and building construction. Last year, 4.8 million cubic metres of sawn timber was used for construction in Australia. The reasons for timber's popularity include availability, it's easy to work with, and people seem to be attracted to the look and feel of timber. Wood has also been used to make fine pieces of craft work, such as violins worth thousands of dollars. The use of trees as a source of energy for cooking and heating goes back to the beginnings of our civilization. Wood heaters and stoves are still popular in Australia, and the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organisation estimates that 1,500 million people in our world rely solely on wood for heating and cooking. This is why so many of the third world countries have a chronic shortage of trees. And then there's paper. We still rely heavily on paper for the transmission of information. Computers are now taking over from books as the way we can store knowledge, but even they generate paper, and it comes from trees. In Australia, we consume 135 kilograms of paper per person per year. By comparison, in the USA, the figure is 250 kilograms, while in India, it's 2 kilograms. A number of other products come from trees. Drugs like quinine, important in the treatment of malaria, cork from the bark of the cork tree, tea, coffee and chocolate, oils like olive oil and eucalyptus oil, and there's rubber, that's so important to us. And now, like a number of other tree products, we've learned how to make the same materials synthetically. We also use trees to change the kind of environment we live in. The urban sprawl becomes a bit more friendly with the increased greenery. The trees provide shade and also protection from unwanted sights, and to some degree, sounds. But there are a number of things that trees do that aren't quite as obvious. Things that we're beginning to realise now are critical for life on the planet. No wonder that trees have been seen as the very symbol of life. Trees, together with other green plants, are the lungs of the earth. By the process of photosynthesis, they convert carbon dioxide to oxygen. They maintain the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that we need for our survival. Because they are locking up carbon from the carbon dioxide in wood, they're also playing an important part in reversing the problem of global warming that's now facing us, the greenhouse effect. In fact, it's been the burning of huge areas of forest together with a massive use of fossil fuels, including fossilised trees, coal, that is believed to have caused this potential catastrophe. Trees also affect our global climate. Forest areas absorb solar radiation, they soak up sunshine. So when large forest areas are cleared, the shininess or albedo of the planet's surface increases, and more of the sun's energy is radiated back into space. The result of this is changes to wind currents and rainfall patterns over very large areas. All of these factors need to be considered when we look at the continued destruction of the world's tropical rainforests. These forests cover only 8% of the Earth's surface, and yet they contain a half of all the growing timber in the world, and at least 40% of the total number of species of plants and animals. This incredible biological diversity is another reason why these areas are so important to us. It's like having a giant natural laboratory where we can discover new medicines, foods, industrial products, a gene pool for scientists, which we are now in danger of losing. So why is it happening? Well, the tropical rainforests in poorer developing countries are being cleared to open land up for agriculture, and also so that the rainforest timber and agricultural products can be sold overseas to help pay off massive international debts. But as a solution to economic problems, it's a very short-term one. Once the forest is cleared, the fragile soil washes away and the land can only be used for growing crops and for grazing for a very short time. The forest then has little chance of regenerating. But we can't sit back in Australia and think that we're not involved, because we import some of this tropical rainforest timber. It could be on sale as murbu, meranti or ramen at your local hardware store. What should we do? What action could we take? On construction sites in Victoria, the Building Workers Industrial Union has decided to act by banning the handling of rainforest timber. The plywood used to form concrete on these sites is made from rainforest timber. Brendan Condon is a union shop steward and explains.
The union sees that the current trend of rainforest destruction worldwide is a threat to the welfare and the future of our members and of all people. Worldwide at the moment, an area the size of a football field is disappearing amongst the world's rainforests every second. Within 30 years, all remaining rainforest areas that have not been actively protected, such as tribal lands and nature reserves, will be gone. This represents the greatest ecological disaster ever to face humankind. This is very relevant to Australia because these timbers that we're using on our construction sites are coming from Malaysia. A few months ago, this piece of timber was part of Southeast Asia's rainforests. Now it's a dead piece of timber on a bin in a Melbourne construction site. This is where Southeast Asia's rainforests are ending up, in the throwaway bins on construction sites in the industrialised nations. These are the most complex, diverse and unique life forms on this planet, but we're just throwing the future away.
The Australian Conservation Foundation sees things slightly differently. They believe the most appropriate thing to do is to focus attention on our overseas aid program. Felicity Wishart is the ACF Rainforest Officer.
Australia is directly involved in the tropical forest destruction because we import about 200,000 cubic metres of tropical timber every year. Now, many people believe that we should be stopping the import of rainforest timbers into this country, and we certainly believe that there should be a boycott of tropical timbers. However, we don't believe we can go straight to that country and say, you can't chop down your forest anymore, we refuse to take them, without offering them alternatives. They rely on logging forests for an income, to generate foreign exchange, and unless we're offering alternative forms of help to those countries, it's very dogmatic of us to say, we don't want your timbers, go away.
What other kind of help could we be offering them?
We can be looking at setting aside areas in national parks and helping them with funding for that, with giving them management expertise in looking after those forests. And we can be looking at other products from the forests. Many fruits, oils, nuts, berries, things such as medicinal products from rainforests are very important. And if we develop those into adequate markets, then the countries concerned would see that they didn't need to chop down their forests to generate an income.
On the other side of the fence is the view that rainforest is not being cleared for logging, it's being cleared for agriculture. Stephen Guest represents the Victorian forest products industry.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, and I think everybody's immediate response is to say, well, ban imports, don't use the timber and you've saved the forest. But you must understand that 85% of rainforest destruction globally is brought about by agricultural clearing, either converting rainforest into beef farms, which is very common in South America, or more importantly, and this is occurring virtually everywhere, it's landless peasants driven by poverty who are adopting a sort of slash and burn shifting agriculture way of life, and that's the cause of rainforest destruction. Now, we would argue that logging practices are a minor part of rainforest destruction, and the destruction comes in only because the logging practices are bad. And it would seem to us that the path to go is firstly to raise the standard of logging and perhaps adopt the model that we had here in Queensland, which was, to my mind, the world's only example of a sustainable rainforest logging industry. It was a beautiful industry. But I think if you set about to destroy the market in those rainforest timbers, you're actually encouraging the process or hastening the process of rainforest destruction. The logic of it is quite simple. If you remove the economic value of the forests from the trees, you've transferred it to the ground, in effect. That means it's got to be used for agriculture, and in that case, the trees get in the way.
And finally, we hear from Stephen Burrows from the Rainforest Action Group. That group's been trying a number of different ways to stop the importation of rainforest timbers.
Well, the Rainforest Action Group in Melbourne has taken a series of non-violent actions throughout 1989 designed to draw attention to Australia's role in the destruction of the global rainforest heritage. We've conducted a series of river blockades trying to stop rainforest timber ships from bringing rainforest timber into Melbourne. We've also held blockade actions outside the Malaysian consulate, the Mitsubishi Bank, and we've also attempted most recently to reload rainforest timber onto the Arawa Bay, a rainforest timber ship that had brought timber into Melbourne.
Can you tell me more about what happened then?
With the Arawa Bay reloading action, 80 activists climbed the fence at 4 Victoria Dock, and we picked up timber that had been unloaded from the ship, and we attempted to reload it onto the ship. The police had been told well in advance of what we intended to do, and they maintained a constant presence to prevent us from reloading the ship. However, for 5 hours we were successful in preventing the ship from being unloaded, and ultimately 32 activists were arrested. 17 of those refused to accept bail conditions and spent 2 days in the watch house in solidarity with the Penang people of Malaysia, who also are in jail for trying to blockade the logging contractors from getting into their rainforest. I think a lot of groups are not yet fully tuned in to all the information they need to be aware of in order to make a carefully considered decision about this issue. The rainforests of the world perform many vitally important functions. They're not just trees. They're a gene pool on which all life depends. They provide habitat for millions of species. They control weather and water patterns around the globe. They provide foods and medicines. They're habitat for people who live in them. The problem is that a lot of groups are looking at the statistics that are thrown around by particularly groups that have a vested interest in rainforest destruction, and these figures are in fact very misleading. I'm familiar with a set of figures that suggest, for instance, that rainforest destruction is only 10% due to logging. What people who are doing those calculations are saying is that we only count rainforest destruction that occurs when there is 100% rainforest clearing. So in other words, if a logging contractor logs 90% of a forest and leaves a 10% tree cover, the rainforest is not cleared, so it's not counted. Now, if you consider what's happening in Indonesia, for instance, government figures there clearly indicate that there is 1 million hectares of rainforest cleared each year. And of that, only 200,000 hectares is the result of agricultural clearing, and that's despite tremendous population pressures in Indonesia.
And now it's over to you. If you believe that rainforest destruction should be stopped, is it wise to ban all imports of rainforest timber?
These rainforest timbers are the worst products currently coming into this country.
We certainly want people to stop using tropical timbers in their daily lives, but we don't believe we can go to those countries and say, we refuse your timber, without offering them some sort of an alternative.
If you set about to destroy the market in those rainforest timbers, you're actually encouraging the process or hastening the process of rainforest destruction.
The most important single thing any of us can do is simply not buy rainforest timbers. That's crucially important because if we undermine the demand for the product, rainforests will simply not be logged.
Is it possible to log tropical rainforests without causing major damage?
It's possible to do that. Now, a lot of conservationists will say there is no such thing as sustainable rainforest logging. We argue vehemently that there is.
I think it's important to recognise that wherever we have remnants left of the global rainforest heritage, they need to be preserved in their pristine state.
Are the rainforests in Southeast Asia being cleared for logging or for agriculture? And how would we find out?
Throughout the world, particularly in Southeast Asia, logging is the major cause of rainforest destruction.
It's landless peasants driven by poverty who are adopting a sort of slash and burn, shifting agriculture way of life, and that's the cause of rainforest destruction. Now, we would argue that logging practices...
Now let's look at the situation with trees in our own country. Apart from Antarctica, Australia is the driest and least fertile continent in the world. So the role that trees play in relation to our soils and water is extremely important. Trees play an important part in making soil. Their roots can break rocks apart. And this leaf litter, this bark and these leaves eventually break down to make humus, which is the essential organic element in all good soil. Trees have a direct effect on our water supplies, both in terms of quality and quantity. Trees and the forest litter act like a sponge, allowing water to slowly soak into the ground and then be gradually released into rivers, creeks and water storages. Tree removal from catchment areas will mean flooding because of the sudden large volume of water running off the land, soil erosion, muddying of water supplies and the siltation of waterways and storages. Apart from the effect on our water, the wide-scale clearing of trees for fuel, timber and agriculture has also had a dramatic effect on the other resource that we're very short of, our soil. The increased runoff of water has taken massive quantities of soil with it, causing gully erosion like this. Removal of trees with their deep roots holding the soil has also meant that in other areas the soil has been defenceless against wind erosion. Tree clearing has also caused salting problems. Trees intercept much of the rain that falls on the land. The rain evaporates from the leaves, trunks and branches and the tree litter on the ground. After clearing, an increased amount of water is able to soak down into the underground water table. That salt water is rising to the surface and killing vegetation. As farmland, this country is now worthless. You know, since white settlement, we've taken a lot of trees off this country to make room for crops and pastures. It's only now that we're starting to bring in tree clearing controls and that farmers are getting into tree planting in a big way. It's going to be a huge task. But what about those areas of native trees that still remain? What are we going to do about those? In Australia, there's a high demand for timber and timber products, including paper. We produce about 16.8 million cubic metres of timber, but we also import forest products worth $1.8 billion in the same year. So it's understandable that there's an amount of debate about the fate of our forests. And in the past few years, members of various conservation groups have campaigned vigorously to prevent areas from being logged, especially since the export of eucalypt wood chips to Japan has commenced. Should we leave some of these areas totally untouched, keeping them as wilderness?
Well, wilderness places are those places, those parts of the country which are remote from human activity, remote from the activities of modern society, and at the same time relatively undisturbed. Wilderness areas, be they forests, be they arid lands, be they alpine areas, but perhaps in this context the wilderness forests, are especially important for a whole lot of reasons other than their recreational reasons. They've got a whole lot of scientific biological values. Wilderness forests are a very important yardstick against which to assess how much impact we in modern society are having on the rest of our forests, on how far that impact is spreading. If we don't have a benchmark, a yardstick there, we don't know what our long-term impacts are. We know they're adverse, but we don't have anything to measure them against. Wilderness forests are also a very important source of what we might think of as seed stock to maintain species and the whole evolutionary process in an undisturbed way, so that as changes occur, in climatic change being the current debate, we've still got some untouched areas that are evolving in their natural ways to come back to provide more resource, perhaps even to be the salvation of some species.
But is it possible anymore?
Wilderness is probably the most vexed question of all, particularly from our perspective. Firstly, I think it needs to be understood that there's probably only one value that, of wilderness that can't be accommodated in, say, a normal national park regime, and that's this value that people do attach a high value to, of solitude. And it doesn't really matter to many people whether they ever go into the wilderness. They get a nice warm feeling knowing it's there. This is understandable. But wilderness certainly is not about creating jobs. National parks can, because you can proactively manage those for the benefit of tourists. Wilderness is the antithesis of tourism. The purpose is to keep out the maximum number of people, not bring them in. There are no roads, no tracks, no vehicles allowed. There are no camping facilities per se. You go in there carrying on your back what you can, and that's about it. So they're not job generating. I don't think that that should be put forward as an argument in support of wilderness. You can say that in respect of a national park, but I don't think you can in respect of a wilderness.
Much of the argument seems to revolve around the value of these forests. Certainly we can turn them into cash, but what's their real value?
Wilderness certainly is not about creating jobs.
Those who care about the future of wilderness should not get drawn into the question, the debate of putting a dollar label on everything. There are a whole lot of moral, ethical, ecological values which are not best accounted for by labelling them with the numbers of dollars that they're worth.
Well, wilderness areas aside, can we log our native forest on a continuing or sustainable basis? Do we know enough about it? Can we be sure that we're not going to cause irreparable damage?
The full harvesting of a forest done correctly should be a help to the forest. If we take sections of the forest out, I know the argument is that we devastate the forest, but we are only taking a very small section. And on the process of taking the mill log and the pulpwood and clearing the area and burning the residue on the forest floor, that in itself opens the gum nut, spreads the new seed, and the fire created the ash bed for the new seed to start its new life and that new forest, creating in that section a totally new young forest for the whole of that section that is taking out. And they only work in small areas of what they call a coop, which would be up to perhaps 10 or 20 hectares. From there, we don't go near that coop. We go as far away as possible and start the next coop. So that the corridors are actually between coops. There is corridors on streams and beside streams where there's no logs or pulpwood is taking out.
But John French, an entomologist and forester from the CSIRO, is not convinced.
Well, really, no, we just don't know enough about forest ecosystems. Let me illustrate that. My area of specialty would be insects. Forest insects that have co-evolved with those forests, and they've done it for a very good reason. You know, the word co-evolution is a very apt word, because it means to say that as the forest is growing and living and dying, so all the insects are involved with this. And they're part of that little pump, that energy flow. And you come along and clear fell or disrupt the forest in whatever way, you're going to disrupt these other smaller systems. Now, to say that we're not doing anything because the trees look healthy, a healthy tree doesn't mean to say you've got a healthy forest. And the trouble is that the level at which it's happening, these changes, which are very subtle, they have to be studied They have to be experimented. You just don't take it for granted. You can't just walk in there and say, that tree looks fine or that forest looks good. You've got to come focus right in, and we're talking, say, now on the insects. And let's say, take the area that I'm more familiar with, termites. What are the role of termites in a healthy forest? What do termites do? Termites sort of mop up. They're detrivores and herbivores, but they're part of that recycling. They basically take cellulose and lignin and turn it into protein. They turn it into themselves, which are in turn predated, which are in turn, you know, predated upon. So you've got a system where you don't have one character just doing his thing and that's it, but they're all interconnected. And you can never merely do one thing in a forest. And if you go in and remove trees, you have a wave action right the way back down various food chains. And if we don't study them, we haven't a clue what we're up to.
Well, how simple a solution would it be just to stop all logging in native forests? And what about the people who rely on the forests for jobs? And where are we going to get our timber from instead? Well, here's one answer. It's a plantation of Californian softwoods, Pinus radiata. We're brought here to help meet our timber needs. All the trees you see behind me here were probably all planted at the same time and probably will be harvested at the same time as well. The big advantage of these trees is that they grow fast, and they're usually grown on poorer farmland, but sometimes they've replaced native forests. These trees were originally planted because of the demand for timber for paper production, and now pine is being used more and more as a building timber. And remember, as a nation, we can't supply our own demand for timber. We still import wood products worth $1.8 billion in a year. But there are questions concerning the wisdom of planting a single species of tree and of the effect on habitat for native birds and animals.
I think it's important to use the existing pine plantations that we've got. Both existing and planned softwood and hardwood plantations are looking at replacing a lot of our need for the logging of native forests by the year 2005. However, to then go on and plant more pines is a very big problem because pines are a monoculture species. They're like any crop. They have the advantage in the sense that they are a longer rotation. So in terms of ecosystem sustainability, they have less impact than wheat, but they are a monoculture. They don't support native species, except for perhaps a very limited number. And what we'd be looking at moving towards is a multiple species indigenous plantation model.
Why is the industry so keen to continue planting radiata pine?
Well, firstly, I believe that there's great scope for the farming community to grow hardwoods as an adjunct to their normal farming operations. They can provide them with various economic benefits as well as environmental ones. You've got posts for fencing, you can build sheds, you can do these sorts of things. But I think in terms of plantation forestry, the intensive production of wood fibre from a tree farm, if you like, the problem we've got is that there's only one type of plantation in Australia which has proved to be commercially viable and therefore of interest to the private sector, and that's a monoculture of exotic softwood, in this case Pinus radiata. People say to us, why don't you grow eucalypt plantations? The short answer is, the logic of business is such that if that were profitable, it would be done. It's socially desirable, there's no question of that. But economically, from our perspective as business investors, it's not. So the alternative to the private sector doing that for profit is for the taxpayer to fund that process through government. And I've seen no indication of willingness to do so. There's research going on. There's promising research in the CSIRO that suggests that you might be able to get sawn timber out of a native hardwood plantation in about a 50-year time frame. Now that's about a 30-year improvement on the current time frame. What we would want to know before we would risk our capital is at the end of that time frame, are we going to be able to harvest a product that will show a profit? Because business exists to make a profit.
Well, could the idea that the continued planting of pines is the best business plan be questioned? And what effect will pines have on our native wildlife? Finally, let's really bring our focus close to home, right inside, Half of the wood cut each year in the world is used for cooking and heating. What should our attitude be to using wood for heating our homes? Even in the cities, it's still a popular fuel. You might have an open fire or a potbelly stove at your place. Are there any questions we should be asking? We don't live in a third world country. We do have choices. First of all, where does that wood come from? Most of our firewood comes from the leftovers from various forest industries, saw logging, post and sleeper cutting. It's considered second-grade timber or rubbish. But would it be better if it were to stay in the forest?
One of the dangers in removing firewood from the forest, whether it's cutting down dead trees or picking up fallen timber, is that it's removing the home sites and the feeding sites of many forms of wildlife. Standing trees usually have hollows, and they're the nest sites for arboreal marsupials like possums and gliders, for owls, for parrots, and for a host of other forest-dependent wildlife. On the ground, hollow logs are the homes for lizards, for frogs, and for insects and other invertebrates that are fed on by such wildlife. If we remove those by cutting down trees for firewood or for cutting up fallen branches for firewood, we are effectively removing an important resource, both two important resources, home sites and feeding sites for very many forms of wildlife.
And what goes up the chimney? Well, a group at the University of Tasmania has been studying the effects of wood heaters on air quality. According to their report, wood smoke can contain over 100 different compounds, including toxic gases such as carbon monoxide and noxious respiratory irritants such as aldehydes, phenols and furans, and plus particles including 17 primary pollutants, 14 carcinogenic compounds, 6 cilia toxic and mucus coagulating agents, and 4 co-carcinogenic or cancer-promoting agents. Obviously, sitting around a campfire or relaxing in front of that glowing open fire will never be the same again. In answer to the problem of pollution from wood heaters, Kevin Wood, yes, that really is his name, suggests that the problem relates to what people burn on their fires.
The two most common problems the industry has is the use of what we call green wood, that's wood that has been felled less than 2 years, is not suitable to be used in a fireplace or a wood heater. And secondly, wood which is moist from rainfall or whatever. You get all sorts of undesirable burn effects from the appliance. You get carbon monoxide and other gases emitting from the appliance because it has not burnt the wood at a suitable temperature.
Well, if you're still worried about that impressive list of nasties going up the chimney, and you're not happy about kicking possums and parrots out of their homes, what are you going to use to heat your house? Nice clean electricity? Don't forget what happens at the power station. They burn coal, a major contributor to global warming, the greenhouse effect. Burning natural gas is also releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Maybe it's not just a question of looking at the alternatives. Maybe it's time to use less of these energy sources. Perhaps it's time to redesign our homes so they're far more energy efficient. And perhaps we could cut down on our consumption of tree products. We could use less paper. And then it's time to plant some trees.